Beneath the swirling tides of the Pacific, where sunlight fades into endless blue, a legend stirs, one that has shaped Japan's connection to the sea for centuries. Picture this: a colossal dragon, his scales shimmering like a balloon, coils through the depths, commanding storms and tides with a flick of his claw. This is Ryujin, the god-king of the ocean, a being so powerful that sailors once whispered his name like a prayer, and so feared that entire villages offered treasures to appease his wrath. But who is this enigmatic deity, and why does his story still ripple through Japan's myths, festivals, and even modern pop culture? The answer lies in the heart of Shinto belief, where dragons aren't just monsters, they're divine forces of nature. Ryujin doesn't merely rule the waves, he is the sea. His palace, built from coral and pearls, houses the tides themselves, and his whims can bless fishermen with bounty or drag entire fleets into the abyss. But here's what makes him truly fascinating. Ryujin isn't just a distant god. He's a trickster, a father, a keeper of immortality, and even a patron of human ingenuity, proof that the strongest beings in myth are never just one thing. So how did a dragon become so woven into Japan's soul? From ancient tales of samurai seeking his magic swords to festivals where dancers embody his serpentine grace, Ryujin's influence is everywhere. And today, we're diving deep past the surface legends into the mysteries of his underwater kingdom, his connection to emperors, and the shocking truth about his role in one of Japan's most enduring folktales. Because when you unravel the story of Ryujin, you're not just exploring a myth, you're uncovering the fears, hopes, and reverence of an entire culture for the untamable power of the ocean. Ready to begin, the depths await. Long before written history etched his name in scrolls, Ryujin's presence rippled through the oral traditions of Japan's earliest fishing villages. Imagine coastal shamans chanting prayers to the Watatsumi, the sea's elusive god, as nets were cast into waters believed to be his living body. These primal whispers eventually crystallized in texts like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest chronicles from the 8th century, where Ryujin emerges not just as a local spirit but as a sovereign of the deep. His earliest depictions reveal a fascinating duality: a dragon shaped by Japan's indigenous Shinto reverence for nature's raw power, yet gradually adorned with traits borrowed from Chinese legends, like the pearl of wisdom clutched in his claw, a symbol of enlightenment foreign to Japan's native myths. This cultural fusion wasn't accidental. As trade routes between Japan and China expanded, so did the exchange of stories. Chinese dragons, often benevolent rain-bringers, lent Ryujin their serpentine grandeur, while Shintoism anchored him to something distinctly Japanese: the belief that gods inhabit every rock, tree, and wave. Where Chinese dragons soared through skies, Ryujin remained bound to the ocean's heartbeat, his divinity intertwined with the livelihoods of fishermen and the terror of tsunamis. Over centuries, Buddhist traditions further enriched his lore, painting him as a protector of sacred knowledge. Temples began housing statues of Ryujin alongside Buddha, a visual testament to how seamlessly he absorbed new roles while keeping his Shinto soul. Yet what truly sets Ryujin apart is how his myth mirrors Japan's own relationship with the sea. In one folktale, he gifts a peasant a never-emptying rice sack, a proof of the ocean's generosity. In another, he swallows a maiden whole, a reminder of its indiscriminate fury. These aren't just stories, they're cultural lessons carved into legend, teaching reverence for a force that nourishes and destroys in equal measure. Even his palace, the Ryūgū-jō, shifts with the tides, its halls said to change color with the seasons, blending permanence and impermanence like the sea itself. To understand Ryujin's origins isn't just to trace a myth, it's to witness how Japan wove its fears, hopes, and borrowed wisdom into the scales of a dragon who still swims through their collective imagination. Beneath the churning waves, where the pressure would crush mortal ships like eggshells, lies a realm of impossible beauty, Ryūgū-jō, the Dragon Palace. Picture walls of living coral that pulse with bioluminescent light, towers spiraling upward like nautilus shells, and gardens where sea lilies bloom in eternal twilight. This isn't just a home, it's the beating heart of Ryujin's power, a place where the ocean's chaos bends to divine order. The very architecture defies human logic. Halls shift like currents, rooms expand to fit the tides, and staircases twist in ways that confuse even seasoned divers. At its center, Ryujin's throne room glows with the light of two sacred jewels, kanju, the ebb jewel, and manju, the flow jewel, each no larger than a fist but holding dominion over every wave on earth. Legends say these gems aren't mere tools, they're extensions of Ryujin's will. When he lifts the kanju, waters retreat, stranding boats on suddenly dry land. When he raises the manju, tsunamis surge at his command. But here's the twist, the jewels don't just control water, they mirror the duality of the sea itself. Fishermen's tales speak of Ryujin testing mortals by offering the kanju as a gift, only to snatch it away when greed surfaces, drowning villages in retribution. It's a reminder that his power isn't just about destruction or benevolence, it's about balance. Time itself unravels differently within Ryūgū-jō's walls. A single banquet in the palace might last 3 days underwater, but return to the surface and decades could have passed. This motif echoes across global folklore, from Celtic fairy mounds to Urashima Taro, the Japanese fisherman who visited Ryujin and returned to find his world centuries older. But in Ryujin's case, the time warp carries deeper meaning. It's a metaphor for the ocean's eternal rhythm, indifferent to human struggles. Sailors vanish in storms, yet the tides keep moving. Empires rise and fall, but Ryūgū-jō's coral gates never crumble. The palace's treasures aren't just gold and pearls, they're stories. Shelves hold scrolls written in whale song. Cabinets preserve storms bottled in glass, and the floors are inlaid with maps of currents no mortal has sailed. Even the servants, fish-headed courtiers, jellyfish maidens, move with the precision of tides, their loyalty as unshakable as the deep sea's pressure. To visit Ryūgū-jō isn't just to witness wealth, it's to stand in the presence of a god who has turned the ocean's mysteries into his courtly decor. And perhaps that's the most striking truth about Ryujin's domain. For all its splendor, it's a mirror. The shifting halls reflect the sea's unpredictability. The time-warping feasts echo its timelessness, and the jewels. They're proof that humanity's fate has always rested in the dragon's claws. His true form is as fluid as the ocean he commands, a dragon who bends perception like light through water. In ancient scrolls, Ryujin coils like a tempest-given flesh, his serpentine body stretching longer than warships, each scale a mirror-polished plate of a balloon, reflecting storms and sunsets with every undulation. His face melds the regal fury of a lion with the sinuous grace of a carp, whiskers like tidal currents twisting through the deep. But blink, and the god might stand before you as an old man with seaweed hair, or a warrior clad in robes woven from sea foam, his shape shifting a deliberate echo of the sea's own mercurial nature. Artists across centuries have wrestled with capturing his essence. Medieval Emaki scrolls paint him with claws like crescent moons, eyes burning with the cold fire of bioluminescent jellyfish. Edo period woodblock prints shrink his form into elegant symbolism, emphasizing the curve of his spine as it mirrors crashing waves. Yet modern anime like Naruto or One Piece reimagine him with scales like shattered stained glass, each fragment humming with elemental energy, proof that Ryujin's image evolves alongside Japan's storytelling. What never fades, though, is his hybrid nature. Even in human guise, he carries traces of the deep, teeth just slightly too sharp, pupils slit like a shark's, or a voice that resonates with the pressure of the abyss. The most striking detail lies in his transformations. When wrathful, his body swells to eclipse islands, fins fanning out like hurricane clouds. In benevolence, he might appear as a crimson koi no larger than a child's palm, a disguise that fuels countless folktales of unwitting villagers sheltering a lost fish that later rewards them with miracles. This duality isn't just artistic flair, it's theology written in scales. Ryujin's ever-shifting form reflects Shinto's belief that gods inhabit both the grand and the humble, from tidal waves to tide pools. Even his colors whisper meaning: cobalt for the open sea, jade for shallow coves, storm gray when angered. To see Ryujin is to witness the ocean's soul, beautiful, terrifying, and endlessly changeable. Ryujin's underwater court isn't a kingdom of solitude, it's a dynasty, a swirling tapestry of family and servants as rich in personality as the ocean is in life. At its heart stands Toyotama-hime, his radiant daughter, whose name means luminous pearl princess. She isn't just royalty, she's a celestial bridge between sea and sky. Legends paint her with skin like moonlit foam and hair that flickers with the same otherworldly glow as deep-sea creatures, a living embodiment of the ocean's hidden light. But don't mistake her elegance for fragility. In one of Japan's most beloved tales, she marries a human hunter, Hoori, and bears his child, only to reveal her true dragon form during childbirth, a moment of raw, untamed power that sends her husband fleeing in shock. This isn't just a story of love or betrayal. It's a reminder that even Ryujin's kin carry the sea's dual nature, breathtaking beauty laced with unfathomable danger. Then there's Otohime, another daughter often woven into the same myths, though some scholars argue she might be another name for Toyotama-hime. Otohime's legacy thrives in the tale of Urashima Taro, the fisherman who rescues a turtle, only to discover it's her in disguise. When he visits her father's palace, time bends, and he returns to land centuries later, clutching a mysterious box that must never be opened. These sisters aren't mere side characters, they're cosmic anchors, linking Ryujin's world to humanity's through marriage, gifts, and tragic warnings. Their stories echo a recurring theme: the sea gives, but it always takes something in return. But Ryujin's court isn't just family, it's a menagerie of devoted and sometimes misfortunate servants. Take the jellyfish, once said to have bones until Ryujin punished it for failing a task, leaving it forever boneless and drifting. Or the sea turtles, ancient messengers who surface in art as symbols of longevity, their shells etched with maps to Ryujin's realm. Even the humblest fish play roles. In one folktale, a humble sardine outwits a boastful shark with Ryujin's indirect blessing, proving that in the dragon's domain, even the small can triumph. What's fascinating isn't just the hierarchy, but how these beings reflect human fears and aspirations. The jellyfish's punishment explains its alien biology. The turtles embody endurance. Toyotama-hime's marriage mirrors humanity's yearning to ally with nature's power, and the inevitable cultural shock when nature refuses to be tamed. Together, they form a mythic ecosystem where every creature, from princess to plankton, carries a lesson. To witness Ryujin's court is to see the ocean's soul distilled into stories that still ripple through Japan's festivals, where dancers don jellyfish masks and children reenact Urashima Taro's fateful voyage. The sea isn't just water, it's a family drama, a divine bureaucracy, and a stage for morality tales, all swirling beneath Ryujin's watchful gaze. The tide jewels kanju and manju aren't just magical trinkets in Ryujin's hoard, they're the physical embodiment of the ocean's heartbeat. Imagine two palm-sized orbs, one shimmering like a cresting wave under moonlight, the other dark as the abyss where currents go to die. Together, they hold the power to summon or still the seas with a mere gesture, but their true significance unfolds in the legend of Hoori, the mortal hunter who dared to marry Ryujin's daughter. Hoori's story begins with a loss. He borrows his brother's fishing hook, only to drop it into the depths, a careless mistake that spirals into a divine ordeal. Desperate, he dives after it and finds himself in Ryujin's palace, where the dragon god doesn't simply return the hook. He hands Hoori the kanju and manju with cryptic instructions. Use one to drown his greedy brother, the other to spare him if he repents. Here's where the jewels reveal their deeper meaning. They aren't just tools of destruction, they're tests of humanity. When Hoori's brother refuses to relent, the kanju summons a tide that swallows his village. Only when he begs forgiveness does Hoori raise the manju, pulling the waters back like a curtain. The message is clear: Ryujin's power doesn't exist to punish or reward, but to restore equilibrium. The jewels also mirror Shinto's view of nature as a sacred balance. In rituals, priests would mimic their magic, raising and lowering wooden wands to symbolize tides during ceremonies for bountiful fisheries. Even today, some coastal shrines house replica jewels, not as idols, but as reminders that the sea's generosity hinges on respect. There's a chilling practicality to this symbolism. Japan's history is etched with tsunamis that erased entire towns, and Ryujin's jewels articulate what ancient survivors knew too well: the ocean doesn't act out of malice or mercy. It obeys its own rhythm, and humanity's role is to navigate that rhythm with humility. What's often overlooked is how the tide jewels blur the line between gift and curse. In a lesser-known variant of the Hoori tale, a fisherman steals the kanju, only to find that every tide now answers to his whims, including the ones that drown his own children. The moral isn't just about greed, it's about the peril of wielding forces beyond human understanding. This duality lives on in modern metaphors. When a tsunami warning siren wails, it's Ryujin's voice echoing through the ages. The same force that feeds your nets can swallow your home. The tide jewels, then, aren't just relics of myth. They're a language, a way for an island nation to speak about the fragile pact between land and sea, a pact written in ebb and flow, held in the claws of a dragon. Hoori's journey into the realm of Ryujin began with a debt, not of gold but of iron. The young hunter had borrowed his elder brother's fishing hook, a simple tool forged by their father, only to lose it in the churning waves. In a culture where every nail and needle held value, this wasn't just carelessness, it was a rupture in the bonds of kinship. His brother's fury forced Hoori to the shoreline, where he stood knee-deep in the surf, whispering prayers to the very god whose depth had swallowed his mistake. What happened next wasn't just divine intervention, it was a test wrapped in the guise of mercy. A lone sea turtle surfaced, an unspoken invitation from Ryujin himself. The descent to Ryūgū-jō wasn't a plunge into darkness, but a slow unraveling of reality. Colors shifted as sunlight fractured through the water, and pressure that should have crushed Hoori's lungs instead filled him with an eerie calm. When the palace gates loomed before him, carved from whalebone and studded with pearls, the hunter expected judgment. Instead, Ryujin greeted him as family. Not because of Hoori's status, he had none, but because the dragon god already knew his daughter Toyotama-hime had been watching from the coral spires, her fascination with the surface world crystallizing into love at the sight of this desperate mortal. Their courtship unfolded like a tide pooling in moonlight. Toyotama-hime showed Hoori libraries where ink floated from scrolls like squid's breath, feasted with him on dishes that tasted of childhood memories he'd forgotten, and whispered secrets of the tide jewel's power. But Ryujin's hospitality came with conditions. 3 years Hoori dwelled in the palace, 3 years of proving his worth not through strength but through adaptability. Could a creature of earth learn the ocean's rhythms? Could he love a goddess without demanding she shrink herself into human form? The answer came in the curve of Toyotama-hime's belly as she carried their child. When labor began, she made Hoori swear one vow: never look upon her in the delivery room. Childbirth, she explained, was the moment when divinity shed its mask. But as her screams echoed through the pearl-lined chambers, Hoori's resolve fractured. He tore aside the birthing curtain and froze. Where his wife had been stood a dragon wreathed in storm clouds, her scaled body coiled around their wailing son, jaws parted in a roar that shook the palace foundations. In that heartbeat of horror, the spell shattered. Toyotama-hime's grief wasn't just at his betrayal, but at the inevitability of it. Mortals, she realized, could worship the sea's beauty but never endure its raw truth. What makes this tale haunting isn't the abandonment, though Toyotama-hime vanished into the waves, leaving their child ashore, but its bittersweet coda. She returned once, in human guise, to sing their son a lullaby that fisherfolk claim still lingers in the whisper of receding waves. Some say she watches from the shallows when storms brew, her love persisting even as Ryujin's tides erode the shores of human memory. The story isn't just about forbidden love, it's about the unbridgeable gap between realms and the sacrifices demanded when gods and mortals dare to intertwine. For generations, fishermen along Japan's coast have known the signs. When the horizon turns the color of a bruise and the gulls fall silent, Ryujin's anger is rising. One legend tells of a man from Ehime who dove near the dragon's palace, not to return a lost hook like Hoori, but to pry a single pearl from Ryūgū-jō's gates. As the thief paddled home, the sea behind him began to boil. By dawn, his village was gone, swallowed by waves taller than temples, leaving only shattered nets and a lone sake cup bobbing in the foam. This wasn't just poetic justice. The tale codifies a brutal truth for an island nation. Disrespect the ocean, and it will erase you. Survivors of real tsunamis recognized their ordeal in these myths, seeing Ryujin's claws in the whirlpools that dragged ships under and his breath in the winds that flattened forests. But here's where folklore twists into something more profound. The dragon's wrath isn't random, it's a response. In Shinto, nature's fury is never meaningless, it's a language. When Ryujin floods a coast, it's because someone ignored the balance, like the merchants in a Kyushu legend who overfished his sacred bays, only to watch their prized tuna fleet sink in a storm that smelled of brine and burnt amber. To appease him, villagers developed rituals as intricate as the dragon's own palace. In Shimane, fishermen still tie ropes of twisted rice straw around their boats, an offering of humility, since straw was once used to carry gifts to Ryujin's underwater court. Off the Izu Peninsula, divers place sake bottles in underwater shrines, their mouths uncorked so the alcohol can mingle with the tides like a shared drink between old rivals. Even today, when typhoons approach, elders in Okinawa whisper the same phrase into the wind that their ancestors did. Ryujin Sama, we remember. The most striking ceremony survives in Wakasa Bay. Every July, priests lower bronze mirrors into the waves, polished sides facing down. They're not just gifts, they're promises. Mirrors in Shinto reflect truth, and these say, "We see your power." For centuries, not a single major storm has struck during the festival. Coincidence, perhaps, but as any fisher will tell you, the ocean loves a good story, and Ryujin loves being remembered. After all, what is a god without witnesses? Not all encounters with Ryujin end in tidal waves or vanishing villages. Sometimes, his scales glint with unexpected mercy. Take the legend of the starving farmer from Shikoku who stumbled upon a wounded turtle trapped in his rice paddy. While his neighbors saw dinner, the farmer saw suffering. He carried the creature back to the sea, whispering prayers to Ryujin as he waded into the surf. That night, a storm raged offshore, but his fields remained untouched. Come dawn, his paddies shimmered with plump grains, their stalks bending under a harvest triple the usual yield. By the shoreline, freshly carved wooden tools lay arranged in perfect rows. Hoes with blades shaped like crescent moons, rakes with teeth like fish spines, agricultural gifts from a dragon who rewards compassion as fiercely as he punishes greed. These stories reveal Ryujin's lesser-known role as a teacher. In Ehime Prefecture, elders speak of a drowned sailor who awoke in Ryūgū-jō's infirmary, tended by jellyfish healers. When Ryujin returned him to land, the man brought back knowledge of pressure points that could cure swellings, a technique still used in coastal acupuncture today. Even the humble sea cucumber owes its medicinal reputation to the dragon. Folklore claims Ryujin gifted it regenerative powers after a kindly diver freed one from a net. Such tales weren't just fanciful morality plays, they encoded survival wisdom. fishermen who respected seasonal fishing bans, said to mirror Ryujin's rest periods, consistently hauled fuller nets, reinforcing the idea that virtue literally paid. The most profound blessings often came disguised as riddles. A Miyagi legend tells of Ryujin appearing to a drought-stricken village as a blind old man begging for water. Those who mocked him found their wells salted overnight, while one girl who offered her last cup watched as he transformed it into an artesian spring. This duality, reward hidden within trial, mirrored the ocean's own lessons. Tides taught patience, storms taught resilience, and Ryujin's gifts taught that survival hinged on reading deeper currents than the surface waves. Modern shrines still honor this benevolent aspect. At Kumano's Hayatama Taisha, sailors tie paper boats inscribed with wishes to a sacred rock, trusting Ryujin to guide them as he once guided Hoori. During Osaka's annual Aoi Matsuri, dancers twirl blue banners embroidered with dragon scales, celebrating not just his power, but the lunar calendar he supposedly gifted to fishermen, a celestial map of safe voyage days. Even now, when a trawler escapes a squall unscathed or an aquaculture farm thrives against odds, you'll hear the same phrase, Ryujin Sama remembered. Because in the end, his greatest gift wasn't magic or miracles, it was the understanding that the sea, like its dragon lord, responds to how humanity chooses to meet it, with fear or with reverence, as an adversary or as the oldest teacher of all. The pages of the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest surviving texts, crackle with Ryujin's presence, but not as a mere footnote in mythology. Here he emerges as a political force, his divine bloodline twisted into the very foundations of imperial authority. In the Kojiki's 8th century scrolls, Ryujin isn't just the ocean's ruler. He's the grandfather of Empress Jingu, the legendary warrior queen whose conquest of Korea was supposedly blessed by his tidal jewels. This isn't accidental storytelling. By weaving Ryujin into the imperial genealogy, these chronicles perform a masterstroke of statecraft, positioning the Yamato dynasty as inheritors of both earthly and aquatic dominion. Yet the two texts diverge in subtle, telling ways. The Kojiki, compiled in 712, paints Ryujin with vivid, almost intimate strokes, his palace gates creaking open for mortal heroes, his voice thick with paternal concern when advising Jingu. Contrast this with the Nihon Shoki, finished 8 years later, where Ryujin becomes more aloof, his interventions framed as cosmic endorsements of imperial ambition rather than personal alliances. Scholars trace this shift to the text's audiences. The Kojiki, meant for courtly ears, retains the flavor of oral tradition, while the Nihon Shoki, designed for diplomatic showmanship, sandpapers Ryujin into a symbol of Japan's unassailable divine right. The most explosive claim comes in the Nihon Shoki's 3rd scroll, where Ryujin's granddaughter Toyotama-hime doesn't just birth a child with mortal hunter Hoori. She founds a lineage leading directly to Emperor Jimmu, Japan's mythical first ruler. This genealogical sleight of hand achieves two things. It sanctifies the imperial family's descent from both sun goddess Amaterasu and the sea's might, while also explaining Japan's territorial claims. If the emperor's ancestors could command Ryujin's tides, shouldn't those tides reach define national borders, but read between the lines and cracks appear? The chronicles conspicuously avoid detailing Ryujin's interactions with living emperors, focusing only on mythic progenitors. Some historians argue this reflects an unspoken tension. The court's need to claim oceanic legitimacy while fearing the sea god's unpredictable nature. After all, how does one enshrine a deity whose true allegiance lies with typhoons and tsunamis? The answer may lie in rituals like the Daijusai, where new emperors offered rice to Ryujin in secret nighttime ceremonies, acknowledging his power too volatile for daylight politics. These ancient texts reveal Ryujin as both a spiritual anchor and a political chess piece. His waves didn't just shape coastlines, they shaped throne rooms, proving that in Japan's mytho-history, even dragons could be drafted into propaganda. Yet the sea refuses to be tamed by parchment. For all the chronicles' claims, Ryujin's deepest truths still swirl beneath their inked surfaces, waiting like riptides. Watatsumi Jinya, perched on the cliffs of Shimane Prefecture, isn't just a shrine, it's a threshold. Here, the scent of salt and pine mingles with the echoes of priests chanting to Ryujin, their voices rising like tide against stone. Unlike typical Shinto shrines with their crimson torii gates, Watatsumi's entrance is a massive stone torii submerged in the surf, visible only at low tide. Pilgrims wade through ankle-deep seawater to reach it, a deliberate act of humility. You don't walk to Ryujin's domain, you trespass on its edges. Offerings here aren't the usual rice or sake, but treasures washed ashore by the dragon's whims. Abalone shells polished to mirrors, driftwood carved into fish shapes, and sometimes, if the god is generous, pearls still glistening with seawater. The Honden, or inner sanctuary, houses no statue, just a sacred well said to connect directly to Ryūgū-jō's depths, its water swirling unnaturally even on windless days. 200 miles south in Nagasaki, Ryujin's presence erupts in color and sound during the Kanchai festival. For 3 days each October, streets transform into a moving tapestry of dragon lore. The highlight, a 20-foot-long Ryū-odori, its silk scales rippling as dancers coil it through alleyways, its wooden head snapping at onlookers with jaws hinged to spray dragon breath, a mist of salt water blessed by priests. But the true marvel lies in the choreography. Every undulation, every pause mirrors the ocean's rhythm, quick bursts like choppy waves, slow arches mimicking tidal pulls. Even the drummers adhere to ancient patterns, their beats echoing the pulse of Hoori's tide jewels, 3 rapid strikes for flood, 2 drawn-out thuds for ebb. Smaller shrines dotting Japan's coast reveal even quirkier devotions. At Okinawa's Benzaiten shrines, worshippers offer not pearls but music. Sanchin lutes played facing the waves, their snakeskin drums vibrating with melodies meant to mimic Ryujin's daughters' voices. In Hokkaido's fishing villages, you'll find salt circles drawn around boat prows each morning, a practice tied to a legend where Ryujin spared a fleet after tasting the purity of its captain's salt stores. Then there's the haunting Oneri-jinya in Mai, where priests still perform release rituals for drowned souls, lowering miniature paper boats filled with the deceased's belongings into the sea, a plea for Ryujin to ferry them gently to the afterlife. What binds these practices isn't just reverence but reciprocity. The salt offered at shrines isn't merely symbolic, it's a return of what the ocean gave, grain by grain. The pearls, they're acknowledgements of luck, not bribes. Even the dragon dances are more than tribute. They're reminders that humans, too, can embody the sea's untamed grace, if only for a festival span. To worship Ryujin is to navigate a relationship older than shrines, the fragile, fervent dance between those who need the sea and the god who is it. While Ryujin commands the ocean's depths with a blend of wrath and wisdom, Japan's other great dragon, Yamata no Orochi, slithers through landlocked legends as a force of pure chaos. Picture an 8-headed serpent so vast its body spans 8 valleys, its scales oozing poison that withers entire forests. Where Ryujin's power is tied to the sea's natural rhythms, Orochi exists solely to devour, a mindless hunger incarnate, demanding annual sacrifices of village maidens until the storm god Susanoo finally slays it. The difference isn't just scale, it's ideology. Ryujin embodies the ocean's duality, nurturing fishermen one day, drowning them the next, while Orochi represents nature's untamed, unredeemable fury. Their domains reveal another stark contrast. Ryujin's kingdom is a structured realm of coral towers and jeweled tides, reflecting Shinto's belief in divine order beneath life's surface chaos. Orochi, though, lurks in tangled mountains or murky swamps, its very form a rejection of symmetry, 8 writhing heads, 8 lashing tails, a living avalanche of flesh. Even their interactions with humans diverge. Ryujin tests mortals, offering gifts like the tide jewels that demand moral choices, while Orochi's only gift is the brief reprieve between meals. Yet here's the twist, both dragons ultimately serve as cultural mirrors. Ryujin's stories teach coexistence with the uncontrollable, how to read tides, weather storms, and respect boundaries. Orochi's tales, though, celebrate humanity's defiance of the irredeemable. When Susanoo tricks the beast into drunkenness before decapitating it, the message isn't about harmony, it's about survival through cunning. This duality echoes across Japanese folklore. The sea, however terrifying, must be negotiated. The monster, it must be slain. Even their legacies differ. Ryujin's influence lingers in rituals and maritime traditions, his name whispered for protection. Orochi survives mostly as a cautionary symbol. Its corpse, according to myth, birthed sacred swords like the Kusanagi, but its spirit is never worshipped, only remembered as a defeated enemy. Perhaps that's the most telling distinction. One dragon is a god to be revered, the other a lesson to be conquered. Together, they map the boundaries of Japan's relationship with the natural world, where reverence ends and resistance begins. Ryujin's scales don't merely shimmer, they tell a story written in currents and storm surges, a narrative of contradiction that lies at the heart of Japan's relationship with water. To understand his symbolism is to grasp why fishermen once tossed their first catch back into the waves as tribute, while tsunami stones along the coast bore grim warnings carved by ancestors. The dragon isn't just a deity, he's the ocean's split soul made manifest nurturer and destroyer in a single breath. Consider the tides he commands. They bring nutrient-rich waters to nurture rice paddies, yet the same currents can drag entire villages into the abyss without warning. This duality pulses through every Ryujin myth. When he gifts Hoori the tide jewels, it's not an act of generosity alone, it's a lesson. The kanju and manju represent the ocean's capriciousness, teaching that abundance and devastation are two sides of the same coin. Japan's maritime identity is etched into Ryujin's very form. His serpentine body mirrors the undulating waves, while his shifting moods, from calm turquoise to storm gray, reflect the sea's mercurial nature. Ancient seafarers didn't view him as separate from the water. He was the water. Sailors spoke of his wrath as typhoons, his laughter as gentle swells, his sorrow as the salt spray stinging their eyes. This personification runs deeper than myth. When tsunami survivors described waves rearing up like a dragon, they weren't using metaphor, they were naming the unnameable, giving form to the terror that had wiped generations from the shore. Yet Ryujin's symbolism also holds a quieter, more pragmatic truth, the necessity of coexistence. Coastal villages didn't just fear him, they revered him as the source of life itself. Salt routes, trade networks built on ocean-harvested salt, were considered his arteries, and the very word for prosperity in old fishing dialects, Yumi no Sachai, translates to the bounty of the sea. Shrines placed at harbor mouths often faced away from land, their gates opening toward the waves in silent acknowledgement that survival hinged on Ryujin's whims. Even today, modern seawalls bear carvings of dragons not as decorations, but as reminders, a plea for balance amid concrete attempts to tame the untamable. The most poignant evidence of this duality lies in folklore's small details. In one lesser-known tale from Tohoku, Ryujin steals a child's wooden toy boat, only to return it weeks later laden with fish, a paradox of theft and generosity that coastal communities knew well. The sea takes, but it also gives. Festivals mirror this tension. The same communities that perform dragon dances to honor Ryujin also reenact tsunami survival drills, spinning his imagery into both celebration and caution. It's no accident that his palace, Ryūgū-jō, is said to change colors with the seasons, a divine metaphor for the ocean's cycles of death and rebirth. To stand on Japan's shores is to stand in Ryujin's shadow, where every wave carries his legacy. The fear of tsunamis, the reverence for fisheries, the awe of unanswerable power, all crystallized in a dragon who refuses to be simplified. He isn't just a symbol of nature's duality. He's the reason an island nation bows to the tides even as it builds against them, a testament to the humility required when facing forces greater than ourselves. Watch the way a fisherman still touches his forehead to the dock before setting sail, or how tsunami survivors leave flowers at the water's edge centuries after their ancestors perished. These aren't empty rituals, they're conversations with a dragon who taught Japan the oldest lesson of all. To live by the sea is to dance on the knife's edge between gratitude and fear. The cresting waves of Hokusai's Great Wave off Kanagawa aren't just water, they're Ryujin's claws. Look closely at the foam, and you'll see hints of scales curling into talons, the sea's fury given mythic form. This iconic woodblock print, part of Hokusai's 36 views of Mount Fuji, is one of countless Edo period ukiyo-e works that transformed Ryujin from a distant deity into a visceral, swirling presence in everyday art. Artists of the time didn't just depict the dragon, they channeled the collective awe and terror of an island nation whose survival hinged on the ocean's whims. Take Yutagawa Kuniyoshi's Ryujin emerging from the waves, where the dragon's body isn't fully visible, just a sinuous spine cutting through the water like a blade, his eyes glowing like lighthouses in a storm. The genius here lies in suggestion. By showing only fragments, a whisker here, a claw there, Kuniyoshi taps into a primal truth. Ryujin is too vast to be contained by paper. Even the clouds above mirror his scales, implying his influence stretches beyond the sea into the very weather. But ukiyo-e's real power was democratizing myth. These prints weren't expensive scrolls for aristocrats, they were mass-produced for merchants, fishermen, even street vendors. A farmer in Osaka might buy a triptych of Ryujin's palace for less than the price of a bowl of noodles, turning folklore into household decor. The most striking example, Toyohara Kunishika's The Dragon King's Procession, where Ryujin leads a parade of sea creatures down a bustling Edo street, his form blending seamlessly with festival floats and kimono patterns. It's a masterclass in cultural fusion, the divine made mundane, yet no less sacred. Color tells its own story. Early prints used imported Prussian blue, a pigment so costly it was nicknamed Ryujin's ransom. When artists like Hokusai layered it into waves, they weren't just painting water. They were embedding value into every brushstroke, making the ocean itself a treasure worthy of the dragon's hoard. Later, cheaper indigo allowed even rural families to own a piece of the myth. Their walls adorned with dragons tinted the same deep blue as the uniforms of the shogun's navy, a subtle nod to Ryujin's role as both protector and challenger of Japan's maritime ambitions. The true brilliance of these artworks lies in their contradictions. In Hiroshige's Ryujin and the Moon, the dragon coils gently around a lunar disk, his scales etched with patterns mimicking the ripples of a sheltered bay. Yet his claws are splayed like shifhooks, a reminder that even serenity masks latent power. This duality resonated with Edo audiences living through an era of enforced peace under the Tokugawa shogunate. Theirs was a world where surface calm belied undercurrents of unrest, much like Ryujin's tranquil palace hiding tempests in its depths. Perhaps the most poignant legacy of these prints is their afterlife. When Commodore Perry's black ships breached Japan's isolation in 1853, ukiyo-e artists swiftly adapted. Prints appeared showing Ryujin rising defiantly against the foreign vessels, his waves dwarfing their steam-powered hulls. The message was clear: the dragon still ruled these waters, no matter whose flag flew overhead. Today, these artworks endure not just as relics, but as portals, windows into an era when every crashing wave carried the weight of myth, and a block of wood could make the divine tangible. Beyond the grand legends of emperors and tidal jewels, Ryujin weaves through simpler tales, stories told to children by firelight, where the dragon's might is measured not in storms but in wisdom. Take the curious fable of the crab who dared to bargain with the sea god. When a fisherman's net snared an entire colony of crustaceans, one particularly clever crab pinched Ryujin's tail as he passed, pleading for mercy. Rather than crushing the impertinent creature, the dragon listened. In exchange for freedom, the crab promised to serve as his eyes along the shallows, scuttling between rocks to report pollution or overfishing. To this day, locals in Toyama Bay claim the striped patterns on certain crab shells are Ryujin's fingerprints, a mark of their ancient pact. Then there's the bittersweet legend of the mermaid Otohime, not to be confused with Ryujin's daughter. A loneliest of creatures, she washed ashore with no memory of her past, her voice stolen by a sorcerer's curse. Ryujin, sensing her grief, offered a deal: serve in his palace for 100 years and he'd restore her song. But time moves differently underwater, and when Otohime returned to land, her human lover had long since died. Her sorrow poured out in a melody so haunting, it echoed across coves for centuries, a reminder that even gods can't shield mortals from heartbreak. Fishermen still speak of hearing her aria during foggy dawns, a ghostly duet with the waves. Not all tales end in melancholy. In Shimane, parents tell of a foolish octopus who boasted it could outwit Ryujin himself. The dragon, amused, challenged it to count all the grains of sand in his realm. The octopus spent years tallying, only to realize the joke too late. Each wave erased its numbers, just as time erases pride. The lesson: even the cleverest creature is but a speck in the sea's grand design. Meanwhile, in Okinawa, firefly squid glow brighter during Ryujin's spring festivals, said to be carrying tiny lanterns lit by the dragon's breath to guide lost sailors home. These fables share a common thread: Ryujin as arbiter rather than tyrant. Whether testing a crab's wit or a mermaid's patience, his role shifts from conqueror to teacher, his scales glinting with moral weight. They reveal a truth often lost in grander myths, that reverence for nature begins not with fear, but with understanding its contracts. Step on the wrong crab and you offend the dragon. Harm a mermaid and you silence a song meant for gods. Even the octopus's folly carries a warning: hubris drowns faster than any anchor, the most telling detail. These stories thrive far from imperial courts, in villages where life hinged on reading tides and respecting creatures great and small. When a Kagoshima grandmother warns her grandson not to harvest undersized abalone, she's invoking Ryujin's law. When a sailor shares his catch with gulls, he's feeding the dragon's messengers. These aren't just fables, they're survival manuals wrapped in scales and whispers, proving that even the mightiest gods speak through the smallest voices. The claim that Emperor Jimmu, Japan's legendary first ruler, descended from Ryujin's granddaughter isn't just a genealogical quirk, it's political alchemy. According to the Nihon Shoki, when Toyotama-hime gave birth to her son with the mortal hunter Hoori, she didn't just leave behind a child, she planted the seed of an imperial bloodline that would stretch unbroken for millennia. Historians call this divine right by tide and tempest, the deliberate weaving of oceanic divinity into the Yamato dynasty's origin story. But why would a land-based aristocracy anchor its legitimacy to a sea god? The answer lies in 8th century power plays. As chroniclers compiled Japan's earliest official histories, they faced a dilemma: how to position an emerging centralized state amid competing regional cults and deities. By grafting Ryujin into Emperor Jimmu's ancestry, they achieved 3 strategic goals. First, it connected the imperial family to Amaterasu, the sun goddess, through Toyotama-hime's mythical marriage uniting celestial and marine divinity under one lineage. Second, it justified expansionist policies. If the emperor's forebear could command tidal jewels, didn't that make coastlines and shipping lanes his natural domain? Third, and most crucially, it reframed Ryujin from a capricious force to a structured ally, his chaos tamed by imperial blood. Yet the records betray unease. While the Kojiki lavishly describes Ryujin's underwater palace, the Nihon Shoki reduces his role to a stepping stone in Jimmu's ascent, less a character than a credential. Scholars note curious omissions. No living emperor is ever described invoking Ryujin's aid directly, only ancestral claims. This suggests a delicate dance. The court needed the dragon's prestige but feared his unpredictability. After all, how do you bureaucratize a deity who drowns petitioners as readily as he blesses them? The tension surfaces in ritual during the Daijusai ceremony, where new emperors symbolically share meals with gods. Ryujin received offerings of abalone and salt, but always at night away from public view. Compare this to Amaterasu's sunlit rites. The message was clear: the sea's power was too volatile for daylight politics, better acknowledged in shadows. Even the imperial regalia hints at this duality. While the sacred sword Kusanagi, said to be forged from Orochi's tail, represents martial might, the jewel strand mirrors Ryujin's tide-controlling pearls, soft power balancing the blade's hardness. Modern historians debate whether this genealogy was ever widely believed or always understood as mythic propaganda. What's undeniable is its cultural staying power. When 19th-century leaders needed symbols to unify Japan against Western imperialism, they revived Ryujin's imperial connection, casting the emperor as a bridge between land and sea. Today, scholars at the Imperial Household Agency still preserve esoteric texts detailing the Dragon's Pact, scrolls that reportedly map Toyotama-hime's bloodline through 60 generations. Whether fact or fabrication, the story endures because it speaks to something deeper than politics, an island nation's primal recognition that its destiny, like its shores, is forever shaped by the capricious, fertile sea. From the pages of ancient myth to the pixels of modern screens, Ryujin's silhouette slithers through pop culture with the same fluidity as his tides. Look closely at Shenron from Dragon Ball, and you'll spot the echoes, those elongated whiskers, the serpentine body coiling through clouds, the pearls of power clutched in his claws. Akira Toriyama didn't just borrow Ryujin's aesthetic. He distilled his essence into a wish-granting deity who emerges only when summoned, mirroring the capricious generosity of the sea god. But Shenron's green scales and orbital flight path reveal a twist. This is Ryujin reimagined for a spacefaring age, his domain expanded from ocean to cosmos, yet still answering to those who dare call his name. Then there's Kyogre, the Pokémon franchise's embodiment of oceanic fury. With its primal form's glowing sigils and ability to flood continents, Kyogre channels Ryujin's most destructive aspects but Game Freak's designers tucked in deeper lore. Its rivalry with Groudon mirrors the Shinto balance between sea and land, while its signature move, Origin Pulse, conjures waves said to predate humanity, a nod to Ryujin's primordial reign. Even Kyogre's habitat in Pokémon Emerald, an underwater cavern accessible only through diving, whispers of Ryūgū-jō's hidden splendor. Nintendo's Mario universe takes a quirkier approach. Dragon Zamasu from Super Mario Odyssey might sport a cartoonish grin, but his submerged throne room and command over water platforms bake Ryujin's duality into gameplay. One moment, he's a jovial host offering power moons. The next, his arena becomes a whirlpool deathtrap, a light-hearted reflection of the ocean's fickle hospitality. Indie games dive deeper. Okami's water dragon, summoned by brushstrokes that mimic tidal patterns, pays homage to Ryujin's role as an artist of currents. Meanwhile, Ghost of Tsushima's Legend of Ryūzō questline weaves his myth into a samurai's moral collapse, framing the dragon as a metaphor for the protagonist's drowning honor. Anime expands the symbolism. One Piece's Sea King's colossal serpents guarding the Grand Line channel Ryujin's guardian aspect, while Mushishi's episode, The Sea of Brushes, reimagines his palace as an in-quash painting come alive, where every stroke holds the weight of drowning souls. Even Naruto's Sage Mode, with its amphibian traits and tidal chakra, borrows from the idea of humans borrowing divine sea power. What unites these adaptations isn't just visual flair but thematic fidelity. Whether it's Kyogre's world-flooding rage or Shenron's conditional benevolence, modern storytellers grasp Ryujin's core lesson: water gives life, but it also demands respect. The next time you see a dragon rise from pixels or cell-shaded waves, listen closely. You might hear the echo of an 8th century prayer whispering across the deep. The Kuroshio Current, a roaring river of warm water slicing through the western Pacific, doesn't just move, it hunts. Ancient mariners called it Ryūgū-no Tsuji, the Dragon Palace Crossroads, and for good reason. Watch satellite footage of its sapphire blue path, and you'll see why. The current curls and twists like a dragon's spine, its edges foaming with turbulence where it rams into cooler waters. To fishermen centuries ago, this wasn't oceanography, it was Ryujin's highway, a divine channel where his messengers raced between human shores and his coral fortress. Science now maps its mechanics, a 60-mile wide behemoth transporting heat like a conveyor belt, but folklore had already decoded its purpose. Tales spoke of Ryujin stirring the Kuroshio with his claws to guide sea turtles to nesting grounds, or whipping it into frenzy to punish sailors who strayed too close to his hidden realm. Bioluminescence, that ethereal glow lighting up Japan's shores on summer nights, wears Ryujin's fingerprints too. When firefly squid erupt in neon blue constellations off Toyama Bay, scientists see chemical reactions between luciferin and oxygen. But dive into the legends and you'll find a sweeter story. These sparks are the lanterns of Ryujin's palace servants, tiny sea sprites sent to guide lost ships through treacherous straits. Even the squid's coordinated flashes, which researchers now attribute to mating displays, were once proof of the dragon's orchestration, his underwater court moving in perfect, luminous harmony. Then there's the terrifying phenomenon of tsunami whirlpools, where retreating waters spiral into vortexes strong enough to snap ships in half. While modern geophysics explains them as hydrodynamic chaos, medieval scrolls depicted these maelstroms as Ryujin's nostrils flaring, his breath sucking entire fleets down to Ryūgū-jō for judgment. The connection isn't pure fantasy. Survivors of the 869 Jogan tsunami described waves coiling like a dragon's tail, a description that matches current modeling of how tsunamis refract around coastal geometries. Perhaps the most striking parallel lies in Ryujin's tide jewels and the moon's grip on Earth's waters. The kanju and manju's ebb and flow power mirrors the lunar pull so precisely that some scholars argue the myth encodes early tidal science. Fishing villages along the Sea of Japan still time their voyages by lunar phases they call Ryujin's schedule, a tradition rooted in observations that the dragon's moods, storm surges, and calm spells often sync with the moon's position. What makes these connections more than coincidence is their adaptability. As oceanography advanced, Ryujin's lore stretched to encompass new discoveries. When 17th century divers encountered the eerie thermoclines layers where water temperature plunges abruptly, they reported passing through the dragon's scales, a boundary between mortal and divine realms. Modern sonar mapping reveals these gradients as critical to marine life, almost as if Ryujin's mythical layers anticipated ecological zones we've only just named. This interplay between myth and science reveals a deeper truth. Folklore wasn't just primitive guesswork, it was a framework for engaging with nature's mysteries, one that let generations of islanders navigate forces they couldn't yet measure. The Kuroshio's path, the squid's glow, the moon's tug on the tides, all were chapters in Ryujin's epic, written in currents and phosphorescence long before textbooks existed. And in a way, the dragon still swims through modern research. When marine biologists today speak of the ocean's memory or the sea's pulse, they're echoing a language first spoken in scales and pearls. Across the waves and continents, dragons rule the waters, but not all serpents of the deep share Ryujin's unique blend of caprice and cosmic order. Take China's Longwang, the dragon king who commands the 4 seas from his crystalline palaces. At first glance, the parallels seem obvious. Both deities control tides, demand reverence from sailors, and dwell in jeweled underwater realms. But where Ryujin embodies the ocean's untamed duality, Both nurturer and destroyer, Longwang operates within a celestial bureaucracy, his floods and droughts dictated by heavenly mandates rather than personal whims. Scrolls from the Tang dynasty show him bowing to the Jade Emperor's decrees, his powers neatly compartmentalized like the canals of imperial water management. Even their appearances diverge. Longwang sports the antlered majesty of a Chinese imperial dragon, his 5-clawed feet stepping with measured grace, while Ryujin's form shifts with the sea's mood, one moment a coiling leviathan, the next an old man with salt-crusted robes. Venture further west and the contrast sharpens. Hebrew mythology's Leviathan isn't a god to be bargained with, but chaos incarnate, a monster so terrifying the Bible describes its scales as shields of bronze and its breath as kindling coals. Unlike Ryujin, who rewards compassion and punishes greed, Leviathan exists solely as an adversary, a force Yahweh himself must subdue in the end times. European folktales amplify this malevolence. Norse lore speaks of Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, whose very body encircles the earth, its venom destined to kill Thor during Ragnarok. These dragons aren't just dangerous, they're apocalyptic, their roles etched in doom rather than balance, yet dig deeper and unexpected connections surface. Ryujin shares striking kinship with the Muisca people's Ukiyo-e, a serpentine goddess who emerged from Lake Iguac to birth humanity. Both myths frame water dragons as progenitors, blending creation and dominion. Even the Mesoamerican feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl mirrors Ryujin's role as a cultural bringer, gifting not tied jewels but maize and calendars. The difference lies in context. Where Quetzalcoatl's symbolism orbits agriculture and sky, Ryujin's power flows through every fishing net cast and every tsunami stone erected along Japan's coasts. What truly sets Ryujin apart isn't just his Shinto roots, but his refusal to be pigeonholed. Longwang answers to higher gods, Leviathan awaits destruction. But Ryujin, he bows to no one. His storms aren't punishments from a distant throne, they're the ocean's raw voice, speaking a language of salt and survival. Modern sailors might have traded dragon tails for sonar, but the lesson endures. Some forces resist bureaucracy, defy conquest, and remind us that the sea, in the end, belongs only to itself. Whistling on a boat wasn't just bad luck, it was an invitation to disaster. Japanese sailors knew even a single note carried over the waves could prick Ryujin's ears, stirring him from the depths like a bell ringing for supper. This taboo wasn't superstition, it was survival. The sea's acoustics played tricks, sound travels farther over water, and a melody that might fade on land could ripple straight to Ryūgū-jō's gates. Fishermen took it further, banning whistling in coastal homes too, as if Ryujin's reach extended through the very mist hanging over docks. The logic was brutal: tempt the dragon's attention, and you might return to find your village scoured clean by a wave that just happened to follow your tune. But whistling was just the beginning. Certain fish were never brought aboard, not because they tasted bad, but because they carried Ryujin's mark. The fugu, or pufferfish, was especially perilous. Its deadly toxin made it risky to eat, but the real danger was spiritual. Legends said Ryujin gifted some pufferfish with venom as punishment for their ancestors' arrogance, turning their flesh into a divine warning. To serve one at sea wasn't just foolish, it was insulting the dragon's judgment. Even today, sushi chefs in fishing towns undergo rituals to purify knives used on fugu, a nod to the old fear that disrespect could ripple back to the deep. Then there were the unspoken rules about waste. Tossing rotten food overboard, acceptable, but throwing rice into the waves, that was sacrilege. Rice symbolized life itself. Its cultivation depended on both rain and river floods, blessings traced back to Ryujin's tides. Wasting it wasn't just poor manners, it was tossing the god's generosity back in his face. In one folk tale from Hokkaido, a merchant dumped moldy rice sacks into the harbor, only to watch his entire wharf collapse under a freak surge the next dawn. the woodpile later found stacked neatly assure Ryujin's way of returning what wasn't his to take. Taboos even governed language. The word shio, salt, was rarely spoken at sea. Instead, fishermen called it shira, white, as if the dragon might mistake plain talk for arrogance. Naming Ryujin directly was riskier still. Old logs show sailors referring to him as Anata-sama, that honorable one, or Owata no Kami, great sea god, titles that wrapped fear in formality. This linguistic dance mirrored Shinto's broader practice of kotodama, the belief that words hold power and a careless syllable could summon forces best left undisturbed. The strangest prohibition, sleeping with your head pointing westward toward the setting sun. Coastal families rearranged bedding to avoid it, convinced the position mimicked a corpse prepared for burial. An omen Ryujin might oblige by dragging the sleeper into his realm. Some villages took it further, placing charms under pillows inscribed with tidal charts, as if geography could bargain with the divine. What unites these taboos isn't just fear, but a profound understanding of reciprocity. The sea gave fish, salt, safe passage, but it demanded mindfulness in return. Break a rule, and you weren't just risking a storm, you were fraying the fragile pact between land and water. Modern science might scoff at whistling bands or renamed salt, but the deeper lesson endures. Nature's balance hinges on respect, and some lines shouldn't be crossed, whether out of piety, prudence, or the bone-deep knowledge that dragons have long memories. Somewhere between the waves lapping Hokkaido's shores and the fireside tales of Ainu elders, fragments of another Ryujin whisper through time, one shaped not by imperial courts, but by the indigenous people who called the sea Roppongi, the divine beast of the waters. Unlike the structured Shinto pantheon, Ainu oral traditions painted water spirits as capricious yet deeply intertwined with daily survival. Stories spoke of Roppongi taking forms beyond dragons, orcas with scales like blackened iron, or colossal squid whose tentacles could strangle islands. One surviving fragment from the Saru River region describes a fish-scaled god who demanded offerings of carved wooden bears, a stark contrast to the pearls and sake of mainland rituals, hinting at a Ryujin reimagined through Ainu cosmology. The erosion of these tales wasn't accidental. As Japan's central government expanded northward in the Edo period, oral traditions collided with written dogma. Ainu storytellers who once described Ryujin as a peer to volcano gods found their narratives were written by scholars who recast him as a lesser Shinto deity. Missionaries in the 19th century compounded the loss, dismissing sea spirits as pagan noise. The result, a puzzle of half-remembered lore. In the few surviving Ainu chants recorded by ethnologists, Ryujin appears fleetingly, sometimes as a salmon god who teaches humans to weave nets, other times as a vengeful whale who swallows disrespectful hunters whole. Further south, the Ryukyu Islands harbor their own fractures. Here, Ryujin blurs with the local sea goddess Mizugami, who lacks a dragon form entirely. Fragments of songs from Okinawa's outer islands describe her as a shape-shifting tide who rewards fishermen with coral beads but drowns those who sing off-key, a far cry from the tide jewel's structured morality. Anthropologists suspect these versions predate mainland influence, preserved in isolation until wartime destruction scattered the last oral historians. Even on Honshu, regional variations faded under standardization. Medieval fishing villages along the Sanraku coast once told of Ryujin's lesser wives, local sea spirits who governed tiny bays and inlets, each with their own taboos. One tale from Kesennuma claimed these minor goddesses wove nets from moonbeams to catch disrespectful sailors, delivering them to Ryujin's court for judgment. By the Meiji era, such nuances were smoothed into homogenized shrine teachings. What survives in snippets points to a richer tapestry. Tohoku folktales collected in the 1920s mention Ryujin's shadow clans, families supposedly descended from his half-human grandchildren, said to heal shark bites with a touch or summon fog to hide villages from slavers. These lineages, now dismissed as superstition, suggest Ryujin's mythos once stretched far beyond divine allegory into lived identity. The sea wasn't just his domain, it was ancestry. The most haunting gaps surround Ryujin's darker aspects. Shinto texts sanitize his role in disasters, but regional prayers reveal glimpses. A tsunami stone in Kii province bears an inscription warning of the dragon's hungry years when he'd claim entire villages to sate his loneliness. Was this a metaphor for seismic cycles or something more primal? We'll never know. The stone was shattered during land reforms in the 1950s. Perhaps the greatest loss is the music. Early European travelers wrote of Ainu elders singing to Ryujin with ukiyo-e harps, their vibrating reeds mimicking the sound of bubbles rising from the deep. Those melodies, untranscribed, died with their keepers. Today, all that lingers are echoes of fishermen's taboo here. A child's rhyme there whispers of a Ryujin who was never just one god, but a chorus of voices drowned out by time's tide. Long before emperors and shrines dotted the land, when the world was nothing but churning brine and drifting mist, Ryujin's coils shaped the very bones of Japan. In the shadowed corners of Shinto creation, myths those not overshadowed by Izanagi and Izaname's more famous spear-stirring, whispers persist of a dragon who rose from the primordial soup, his tail carving troughs that became straits, his breath exhaling the first salt-laden winds. The Kojiki's official account may center on the divine couple, but regional variants from Okinawa to Hokkaido tell a different tale, that the 8 great islands didn't congeal from dripping spear tips, but from pearls shed by Ryujin's scales as he surged through the chaos. One striking version from the Oki Islands describes Ryujin wrestling with a colossal catfish, the Earth Shaker, whose thrashing kept the land from solidifying. With each twist of his serpentine body, the dragon pinned the beast deeper into the abyss, its struggles forming mountain ranges and its stillness allowing the first shorelines to emerge. The myth mirrors geological reality. Japan's volcanic archipelago was indeed born from tectonic violence, a detail the ancients couldn't have known yet captured intuitively through Ryujin's struggle. Even today, certain fishing villages pour sake into the sea during earthquakes, a ritual apology to the dragon for disturbing his eternal wrestling match. The parallels to other cosmogonic dragons are uncanny. Like Mesopotamia's Tiamat, whose split body became heaven and earth, Ryujin's shed scales supposedly birthed the quartz veins that glitter in Shikoku's rivers. Chinese legends speak of Pangu, the giant whose breath became wind and sweat became rain, echoes of how Ryujin storms in Kyushu's myths fertilized the first rice paddies with brackish spray. But there's a crucial difference. Where many creation dragons are slain or dismembered to form the world, Ryujin remains alive and sovereign, his body both the architect and the ongoing ruler of what he shaped. The land didn't arise from his corpse, it's his everlasting masterpiece. This living connection pulses through unexpected rituals. At the base of Mount Fuji, a lesser-known festival reenacts Ryujin's creative act by unspooling a giant rope woven from rice straw across the shoreline, a symbolic representation of his tail dragging land from water. In Shinto cosmology, this isn't just metaphor. The rope, called Shime-nawa, marks boundaries between sacred and profane, echoing how Ryujin's body first divided sea from soil. Similarly, the dragon's association with freshwater springs, often depicted as his tears, hints at a deeper layer. When priests at Ai's Jingu chant of the dragon who quenches the earth's thirst, they're invoking not just a weather spirit, but the being who secreted Japan's very lifeblood from his own essence. The most tantalizing fragments come from Ainu oral traditions where Ryujin, or Rinpoche, collaborates with a crow god to mold the Kuril Islands from volcanic clay. Here, creation isn't a solo act but a tense negotiation between sea and sky, with the dragon's tidal surges shaping the clay as the crow aerates it with wind. It's a rare glimpse of Ryujin as co-creator rather than autocrat, his power tempered by another's. This version, suppressed during Japan's assimilation policies, resurfaced in the 20th century through elderly storytellers who remembered the old songs about the scaled one who danced the shores into being. What unites these variants is the insistence that Japan's land remains tethered to Ryujin's will. When tsunami stones along the Sanraku coast warn that high dwellings are the peace of the village, they're not just practical advice, they're acknowledging that the dragon who birthed these islands can reclaim them with a flick of his claws. Even the myth of Ryujin gifting the tide jewels to imperial ancestors carries this undercurrent. The tools to control the sea are merely on loan from its true master. To walk Japan's coastline is to tread the spine of a sleeping dragon, every pebble a remnant of his creative fury, every wave a reminder that creation and destruction ripple from the same source. Among the glittering legends of tidal jewels and undersea palaces lurk darker current stories where Ryujin's benevolence curdles into something far more sinister. Take the chilling tale from Shimane Prefecture's oral tradition, where the dragon god demands a maiden be shackled to the rocks each autumn, her voice the price for calm fishing waters. Unlike the familiar narratives of tested morals or conditional gifts, these accounts show Ryujin not as a teacher but as a tyrant. Historians grapple with a haunting question. Were these sacrificial motifs always part of his lore, or were they grafted onto his mythos later, perhaps by ruling classes seeking to weaponize faith? The evidence hides in regional discrepancies. While 8th century texts like the Kojiki depict Ryujin as stern but just, Edo period folk plays from fishing villages introduce grisly twists, entire ports vanishing overnight after refusing to surrender their firstborn to the waves. Intriguingly, these darker variants cluster along trade routes where foreign influences mingled. Some scholars point to parallels with Chinese Dragon King myths, where drowning sacrifices appease floods, suggesting cultural cross-pollination. Others argue these tales reflect genuine trauma. When a 1740s tsunami erased a coastal town in modern-day Miyagi, surviving scrolls blamed the disaster on the community's stinginess in withholding promised offerings to Ryujin shrines. Yet the most disturbing layer is how these stories were wielded. During the Tokugawa shogunate, authorities circulated pamphlets depicting Ryujin swallowing rebellious villages whole, a not-so-subtle metaphor for imperial punishment. Villagers who questioned tax hikes or fishing restrictions were warned the dragon's hunger might turn toward them next. The tactic wasn't unique. Medieval Europe similarly demonized pagan deities to enforce Christian doctrine. But in Japan's case, the dragon wasn't vilified, he was amplified, his wrath repurposed as divine endorsement of feudal control. Not all sacrificial tales lack nuance. In a lesser-known Tohoku legend, Ryujin accepts a woven straw effigy in place of a living child, impressed by a mother's cleverness. The twist: the substitute must be crafted with exacting precision, its straw soaked in the family's sweat and tears. Here, the demand for sacrifice transforms into a test of devotion and ingenuity, a far cry from mindless brutality. This version, preserved in remote mountain villages, hints that early tellings may have emphasized ritual symbolism over literal bloodshed, with later tellings distorting their essence. Modern archaeology adds fuel to the debate. Excavations near cursed coastal sites reveal pits filled with animal bones and broken pottery, evidence of ritual offerings, yes, but no human remains. Carbon dating places these pits squarely in eras when written records describe human sacrifices, suggesting oral traditions may have exaggerated or metaphorical the practice. Perhaps giving a maiden to Ryujin originally meant dedicating a harvest's first fruits or sending a priestess to serve at his shrine, with later generations interpreting it literally. The shadows clinging to Ryujin's legend refuse easy categorization. Whether born from trauma, manipulation, or the primal fear of an untamable sea, they reveal how myths warp under societal pressures and how quickly a god of balance can be recast as a monster when fear demands it. Yet even in these grim tales, a thread of Shinto pragmatism persists. After all, what's more in keeping with the ocean's nature than a force that nurtures and devours in equal measure, indifferent to human notions of fairness? The real controversy isn't whether Ryujin has a dark side, it's whether that darkness was always his or merely a reflection of our own. Ryujin's ancient scales shimmer anew in the neon glow of modern screens, his mythos remixed for an era of digital storytelling. Netflix's Trees reimagines him not as a solitary ocean deity, but as a player in Manila's supernatural underworld, a trench-coated, whiskey-drinking diplomat who negotiates between human and spirit realms. This Ryujin trades coral thrones for a speakeasy bar, his tidal jewels replaced by a pocket watch that hums with lunar energy. The shift isn't just aesthetic, it reflects contemporary anxieties about environmental collapse. When Trees' Ryujin warns that the sea's patience wears thinner than melting ice, he channels very real climate crises, transforming from a capricious god into an emissary of ecological reckoning. Meanwhile, Ghost of Tsushima's Legends mode weaves Ryujin into multiplayer gameplay as a spectral force. Players don't merely battle his minions, they become them, wearing masks that mimic his serpentine visage while wielding water-themed abilities. The genius here lies in inversion. Where traditional folklore positions Ryujin as an external force to appease, Ghost makes him an internal power to channel. His duality persists, granting players both healing rains and drowning attacks, but now serves as commentary on how video games blur the line between wielding power and being consumed by it. Even children's media softens his edges without diluting his essence. Ponyo's Fujimoto, the mercurial wizard with wild green hair, embodies Ryujin's protective fury. His obsessive attempts to shield his daughter mirror the dragon's legendary possessiveness over his domain. But Studio Ghibli's magic lies in nuance. Fujimoto's rage stems from love, not tyranny, reframing the god's wrath as something tender and tragic. The film's climax, where he reluctantly accepts humanity's connection to the sea, mirrors real-world generational shifts in environmental stewardship. Indie games take bolder leaps. Dredge's Lovecraftian fishing horror pits players against a version of Ryujin warped by industrial exploitation, his scales clogged with oil, his palace choked by ghost nets. This isn't just metaphor, it's myth responding to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Similarly, Techia's New Caledonian-inspired world features a benevolent sea spirit, clearly modeled on Ryujin, but with a twist. Her power stems from islander songlines, blending Shinto motifs with Melanesian tradition. The most radical reinterpretation, Mortal Kombat's Reign. Originally a generic water-themed fighter, his 2020 reboot infused him with Ryujin's lore. His fatalities now include summoning tsunami waves and skewering opponents with coral spears. It's a fascinating case of cultural boomerang, a Western game series borrowing Japanese myth to deepen a character, then exporting that hybrid back to global audiences. What unites these portrayals isn't just shared imagery, but adaptive resonance. When Trees' Ryujin snarls about humans poisoning their own cradle, he voices modern climate grief. When Ghost of Tsushima lets players wield his fury, it reflects our growing disillusionment with passive heroism. Even Ponyo's childlike wonder carries the quiet hope that the next generation might negotiate better terms with the natural world. The dragon hasn't changed, he simply reflects the tempests of our times, his scales now mirroring screens as once they mirrored tides. Centuries may have passed since fishermen first whispered Ryujin's name into the wind, but his legacy surges forward not just in shrines and scrolls, but in the very pulse of modern Japan. He is more than a myth, he is the embodiment of nature's unyielding duality, a reminder that the same waters that cradle your boat can swallow it whole. From the earliest fisherfolk tossing salt into the waves to today's scientists studying tsunami patterns, humanity's dance with the sea still moves to Ryujin's rhythm. His stories aren't relics, they're living lessons etched in the collective memory of an island nation. where every child knows that disrespecting the ocean isn't just foolish, it's an affront to the dragon who shaped their shores. Consider how his imagery persists, in festivals where dancers coil through streets like human whirlpools, in anime where his scaled descendants guard cosmic seas, even in the quiet rituals of old sailors who still refuse to whistle on deck. Ryujin's influence isn't confined to folklore. It's woven into Japan's identity, a symbol of resilience and reverence. When disaster strikes, when typhoons lash the coast or tides rise unexpectedly, you'll still hear elders murmur, Ryujin's summer is restless. Not as superstition, but as shorthand for nature's indomitable will. And yet, for all his fearsome power, there's an intimacy to his myths. The tale of Hoori and Toyotama-hime isn't just about divine wrath, it's about love strained by the impossible gap between worlds. The jellyfish stripped of its bones, a whimsical fable that explains the creature's strangeness while warning against arrogance. Even the tide jewels, those tools of devastation, carry a message of balance. The sea gives and takes, and humanity must navigate between gratitude and caution. So here's a question to leave you with. If the waves parted tomorrow, revealing a path to Ryūgū-jō's coral gates, would you dare to step inside? To feast at a table where time bends like seaweed in a current, to kneel before a dragon whose scales shift with the moon's phases? Or would you hesitate, knowing that some realms, like some truths, are too vast for mortal minds to grasp? Before you go, tell us, which dragon myth lingers in your imagination? Is it Ryujin's tidal jewels or another tale of scaled divinity? Drop your favorites in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this dive into the depths of folklore, hit that subscribe button. The ocean of myths is endless, and we're just skimming the surface. Until next time, remember, whether you're casting a net or scrolling a screen, the old gods are closer than you think, especially the one who rides the tide.